Well, our mission or our objective is to get as many of the Oceania countries paddling as possible.
Yeah.
Because in the past it was always Australia and New Zealand, so our aim is to get all of the island countries in the Pacific paddling in sprint and slalom specifically, because they're the Olympic disciplines, but others as well.
You're the president of the association, so what is your role as president?
We were sort of forced into setting up an association because we had a development plan in the 90s and we focused on canoe polo because we felt that was something that the island people would enjoy and play and that sort of thing. We were forced into it basically from the International Canoe Federation when they formed continental qualifications for the Olympic Games. We had to have an association to administer that and to organise the championships. So we formed an association and I was on the board at the time, so by default, for want of a better term, I became president, and Marie Burnett, I managed to get a second person onto the board as well because every other continent had two people, or at least two. And she's been fantastic as Secretary General because she's done all the legwork, a lot of the paperwork and the follow-up and with the different countries. So that's actually how it started.
Yeah. I can see you really enjoy doing it, so would you like to share with me what you really like about your role?
Canoeing's always been my sport ever since I was tiny, so I've grown up canoeing and been part of the organisation for a long time. And I guess I just get pleasure with being with people, enjoying the sport that I love and seeing other people enjoy it. And when you talk to the island kids who are here this weekend, they've had a great time. And some of them struggle to be as good as they'd like to be, but they're still enjoying themselves. So that's really nice to see that happening. And hopefully they can go back home and enthuse some of their mates to join them and take up canoeing as well. Most of them are outrigger paddlers, so they love paddling anyhow, but we're just trying to refine that into the Olympic disciplines if we can.
How old is the association yet, and since its start, what did you see as a kind of development so far?
Yeah, we started in 2006. We set the association up, and we had our first congress in, well, this is our third one. So the first one was 2008, the second one 2010. We've just had a 2012, and we took a completely different tack to what we'd done in the 90s. We decided that we would look at the outrigger clubs and try and convince them to offer sprint canoeing as an alternate for their members, not try to take over the club. And that took some discussions, lengthy discussions with some of the outrigger clubs in the islands, like Samoa, for instance, and Cook Islands, because they felt that we might have come in and wanted to change what they were doing, and we had no intention of doing that. We just said, no, this is another opportunity for your members, and it won't cost you anything, and we at least got their membership fee waived for the first 5 years as well. So all of those things helped, and we decided then to concentrate on the Olympic disciplines. And to be quite honest, I targeted people that we knew could paddle in either Australia or New Zealand, and we found more of the island people in New Zealand, and then we helped them go to World Championships, go to training camps, come to Australia for training and training with the Australian team. So that way we built up their skills, but it was a one-to-one. That was how we initially started. It was definitely one-to-one.
Yeah.
Now we've got some good organisations. The Cook Islands particularly are on a roll at the moment. A coach went up there, has been up twice. We sent them boats. They've bought more boats, and they've got quite a few paddlers here paddling, and so they're really enthusiastic, and I think we'll go a long way. So, that's what we want to happen. We want it to grow at the local level. That takes time, of course. And, the island people don't take readily to a lot of change. They like to feel comfortable doing what they're doing. There's also not many people who are capable of perhaps running an association, so that's why we went through the outriggers you can't sort of split people's loyalties and that sort of thing. So we've been fairly sensitive, I think, to how they feel and their culture as well, to bring them into the family. Yeah. I'd like to see, well, still within the outrigger and ICF and outrigger international VAR have an agreement to work together, so that really helps. I would like to see the islands self-sufficient in their own organisation of their paddlers, growing the sport at the local level with the young kids coming and trying stuff out in the lagoons, and then identifying ones who've got some talent. We'd probably always have to bring them out of the islands for specialised training because they just don't have the resources. But I can see that could happen. And local people involved in running it and local people enthusiastic about it, because that will sustain it. If you just have expats doing it, they sometimes pack up their bags and go home and then everything stops. So you need the local people doing it and enthusiastic.
You've already been for a very long time in the sport. You've had several roles, from athlete to all kind of roles. So you've seen a lot, done a lot. How did you see, what kind of involvement have you seen in the sport? And where do you think the sport will be in 10 years, from your perspective?
Well, I guess specifically looking at Australia, it's grown exponentially to when I was paddling sprint, which is what I started paddling, the sprint, and then I changed to slalom. And we used to race out on the river here, and now we've got a regatta course. And there is a lot more interest in clubs, a lot more young people doing it, a lot of development programs, and that's all good for the sport because that's where you get the strength. You need a strong base with lots of people, and then you can select as you go up the triangle. So I think the sport needs to move more and get more equality for the girls that are paddling as well, and that's a fairly difficult argument to win, particularly in Europe, because the sport is Euro-centred. We hope that in the future that we will be able to offer equal opportunities for the girls as for the boys in the Olympic disciplines. That will take some time, particularly in sprint. I think it's closer in slalom than we might like to think. Well, I'm hoping it is. Certainly the level of the girls competing in, say, the C1 in slalom is very high, particularly in Australia, so I'm trifle biased. But once it became an Olympic discipline, you would find a lot more countries dedicating resources to improving the girls' performance. You know, if you've got the carrot there, they'll provide the impetus to get people enthused and to lift their standard. So you just can't keep being mediocre. If you give them a challenge, they'll rise to meet it. So I think that's my next challenge, is to convince the board to look a bit ahead and change some of the ways they're doing things.
Well, what needs to happen, you think, to provide women in sport more opportunities?
We're probably, according to some people, have enough opportunities. We're able to paddle. We're not offered the same equal opportunities, for example, in the Olympic Games. And that's something that the IOC are quite conscious of. And it's historical because in sprint we had 12 medals and 8 of them were for men and 4 for women. We changed that for London, and there's 5 for women and 7 for men, and there was a big outcry about that. You know, how dare you? You've taken away one of the men's events. Well, hello. In slalom it's always been 1 for women and 3 for men. So we need to sort of correct that imbalance, I think, going forward. You know, we're half the population. We paddle differently to the men, but equally as good in our own right. And so we need to just have it as a platform that people can work towards. And I think if you do that, the whole structure underneath will change and lift the girls to meet that challenge.
Shouldn't the fact that the IOC actually wants equal opportunities for both genders, shouldn't that be convincing enough, you think?
It should be. It should be. Unfortunately, some of them tend not to look at the big picture, the global picture. They tend to still look at what effect it might have on their country and their paddlers. And I think that's human nature in some respects. So sometimes you've got to be very forceful, and I'll hark back to the time when they wanted women's events and C1 events in World Cups and not World Championships because they weren't as good as the men. And I put up the argument that no country was going to fund people to go to World Cups. They would go to World Championships because that's something to aim for. But a World Cup, we're not going to invest money in C1 women to go to World Cups. And so I just said to the board, you have to get serious about this. You can't keep saying you're going to make a difference because you're not unless you give them the right incentive. And I think the same would happen with the Olympic Games. If it's in the Olympic program, you'll see a huge difference underneath.
Yeah.
A lot of increase in participation, increase in standard, the times will become closer. Yeah, so it'll happen.
Yeah.
I'm sure it will happen. They just need to have a bit of faith and take that big step. So that's hard.
Yeah. Can you imagine that one day we do have these equal opportunities, etc., that there still might be, a kind of 60% men, 40% women, because the sport might attract more men naturally.
Yeah, that could happen. That could happen, and I'm not against that. I don't think we need particularly 50-50, or that's what we're aiming for. But as long as we have sort of some diversity and the opportunities for women to do these things, So how it pans out in the long term, will be interesting. But I was the first woman on the board, which was an interesting experience going back because no one would listen to me. But now they do, because I've been on the board so long that I think, we better listen to her because she's been around longer than we have. So and when I got very forceful, they used to say I was angry, where if a man gets forceful, he's being forceful and direct, but if a woman's angry. So it's perception, isn't it? And I think some of that's cultural. Anyhow, it's something you live through and work through and eventually change.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
In 10 years, what is the ideal picture of the sport in the future?
The ideal picture would be lots of paddlers to choose from. Racing, of course, in all disciplines at a very high standard. More opportunities for the women to compete. And a lot more incentive for people to volunteer their time to run the competitions and to make everything good for the athletes. Sometimes we struggle to get enough people to be running around and making things perfect for the athletes. And because it's all voluntary, you have to work at continuously and get people enthused and want to be part of it. And I think we need to work on that. And not just, you might get the opportunity to go to the Olympic Games as an official, but you've got to do the hard yards back home and the regattas and the races. So, but I think it probably won't ever be a huge sport. It's fairly select sport in some respects, and small sport in a lot of countries, but not in all. In Europe, it's probably larger in some countries. But it certainly offers a diversity of choices for people who are interested in paddling. You can do long distance, you can do play games and do canoe polo, you can sprint race if you like that. You can just paddle down the river if you want recreational paddling. So as a sport, it offers actually a lifetime of paddling experience for you. And I started off paddling down rivers, then became a sprint paddler, then a slalom paddler and a whitewater paddler, and now I just paddle down rivers. So you can do the whole cycle and still keep paddling, which I think is one of the benefits of the sport that people probably don't often see. It's just not competition. It's a whole of life sort of activity that you can take on. So, so hopefully more people get involved and do that.
Yeah. Well, Helen, to me this sounds like a beautiful future, a beautiful thing to aim for. And I would like to thank you for your time, and it was my absolute pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob.